Alright, we all had a week to recharge the old batteries, so how about we get back into some more Overwatch League action? Mid-season madness has arrived, and many teams are in contention to make the tournament. Who establishes a lead, and who's going to be watching from home? Welcome to Week 7, ladies and gentlemen. This is where it all starts. Just like the previous stage, we're not going to have any APAC action here in opening week. Sorry if that bothers you, but that's how it goes. Additionally, a new patch is going to be implemented, which means we can finally speculate on some potential meta changes. Given the various buffs and nerfs, I think we can all assume that more teams might be willing to play the Reinhardt Rush composition and/or double flex support. Baptiste received quite a few buffs that make him a lot stronger than before. He'll be more effective than ever at healing up those big death-bally compositions made popular by the London Spitfire. There's a good chance that Baptiste becomes the most optimal flex support to run. In terms of double flex support potential, I feel like it makes sense seeing as Zenyatta also got some changes. His new passive, along with some additional health, does make him slightly more viable on the surface. It also helps that Lucio and Ana did receive a few nerfs here and there. I'd expect to see a larger variety of support heroes, at least in the beginning weeks as teams begin to experiment. When it comes to something like tanks, I suspect that more Reinhardt could come to the surface, as mentioned previously, but I doubt that Winston goes anywhere either just because he's still very strong. If anything, he's even better now since he does have reduced ammo cost for his secondary fire. There's also a possibility that we maybe see less Zarya, which could mean trouble for teams like the Dallas Fuel and the LA Valiant. When considering damage dealers, it should feel pretty similar to what we saw during the kickoff clash, although there is a possibility that we end up seeing less Soldier 76 and more Sojourn. Sojourn has gotten quite a few buffs and Soldier's damage has fallen off a bit, so keep an eye out for Overwatch's newest hero. She genuinely might be decent this stage. So yeah, I'd say we're heading more towards like Reinhardt and Winston stuff with more BAP and potentially Sojourn. I can't say for certain what is going to happen, but that's how I'm feeling at least. Enough speculation though, let's get right into the games for this week. And we're going to begin on Thursday with the Florida Mayhem and the London Spitfire. Believe it or not, but I'm actually going to be considering this the first key match of the week. It's two similar performing teams for starters, but also I do strongly believe that the Spitfire possess upset potential here. On paper, this patch kind of favors their composition choices in a lot of ways, and they've proven to be a competitive group overall. But with how crazy things have been this year, a week can change a lot. Florida very well might be ready. The Mayhem are a flexible group not to be underestimated. Winston might be the primary comp that Florida likes, but they've shown a lot of different looks this year, including the rush composition, which they didn't look too bad on. Florida could benefit a lot from the BAP changes as well, since this is a hero that Surma Jed is very good on. If the meta is heading the way I think it is, this could be a real toss-up. If Florida show multiple looks and take advantage of those Winston-centric dive maps, I definitely like their chances. Overall, I thought they were the better team last stage, and I do like their talent more, and now that Exy is finally in America, they very well might have a secret weapon up their sleeves. And because of this addition, I believe that Florida have the greater playmaking potential in this series. So if they even come close to the level of London's teamwork, which I assume they will, there's a good chance they've got this. My pride is going to be 3-2 in favor of Florida. They've shown the consistent competitive nature needed to handle a tough opponent like the Spitfire. It wouldn't be surprising if London go off since this meta could be good for them, but I don't know for certain what's going to happen, so it's better to go with your gut. Diving straight into the next game, I have another key match of the week for you when the Dallas Fuel once again take on the San Francisco Shock. This one is exciting for a bunch of reasons. We'd like to see how the Shock do without the land nerfs for starters, but it'll be interesting to see if the Fuel make any changes too, since Zarya may not be as viable. Oh, and one more thing. The Shock also recently picked up former Boston Uprising tank and collegiate esports player, Mikey, so look out for his potential debut as well as the guy who could play a bunch of those main tank heroes. There's lots to look forward to here with no clear answer for who wins. I genuinely am not too sure how the Fuel react if Zarya comps become weaker. If they practice on other things and they don't do well on them, the Shock might end up tearing them apart this go around. I'd say that the kickoff clash showed us that both of these teams need to make a few adjustments here and there, so it generally might be a struggle for either side. I'm not sure what to think here. The Fuel are the hotter team, so to speak, week, but the patch could have a major impact on composition choices and their overall success. Imagine if double flex support gains traction, the Shock could end up dominating. Although, because I think we end up seeing more Rein and Winston, I feel like we should be preferring the Fuel in this situation in a 5-map series. That's what I'm going with, at least. I know things were not great for Dallas when running Fearless, but there's no reason to give up on him. With how incredibly talented he is and with how good this meta could end up being for him, I'd like to think that he finds his way. So long as he finds his comfort zone, I believe that he will make the more impactful plays in this series. But again, we don't know for sure what's going to happen, so this is a shot in the dark. Which gets us into the final game of Thursday evening. Let's talk Washington and New York. For the sake of the NYXL, I pray that the meta changes for them. The less Lucio they have to play, the better. If they can play something optimal and Kellen can maybe get a bit more comfortable out there, I see no reason why they couldn't give Washington a good fight. If I'm being honest, I think from like a pure playmaking perspective, New York aren't far behind. It's kind of even. It's the synergy in the comfort zone thing, right? The NYXL, they didn't show much of either of those things, and the Justice did. They even showed an ability to change it up and catch opponents off guard with different game plans if necessary, as shown by the Shock series. Although, I do have some concerns about the Justice in a way, as I'm a bit curious to see what happens with Decay. He didn't play as much during the tournament, showing that perhaps Washington are starting to prefer more of a team-oriented playstyle. And if this is the case, they might have an even stronger advantage in this matchup since they have strength in numbers. Or maybe you see it in the opposite way, where without Decay, they don't have anyone to stop Yaki. There's a lot of what-ifs going on here that could decide the outcome of this game. But the thing is, we really don't know how trustworthy the NYXL can be after all those struggles and only having 2 weeks off to try and fix some of those issues. The Justice are just the more stable team. They've shown that they can push decent rosters, so you've got to favor them here. More favorable teamwork and better overall direction may override any potential that ends up coming through meta changes. So I say that the Justice take this in 4 maps. I'd like to think that the NYXL will rebound and get better, especially since things will be fresh in this new meta hopefully for them, but I'm not quite ready to commit to them until they show some better results. Onto the Toronto Defiant and London Spitfire, and again, upset potential is in the air here. Honestly, London might have an even better chance of winning this game compared to the Florida matchup. We haven't seen the Defiant play a lot of other things outside of Winston, or at least I should say that they haven't found a lot of success with some of these other comps. They weren't bad with Rush, and they weren't off Lanzaria, but the sample size isn't that great, and London are a whole different beast. Let's say Reinhardt and Baptiste-centric comps are really good. Well, I don't know if Toronto have it in them to play at a high level then. They seem the most comfortable when they're on the dive. Now granted, Winston still should be good, but BAP seems so strong right now, and you can't really run a BAP with a Winston, and you have to remember that this is the Defiant's first week after firing KDG. I'm expecting a potential adjustment period out of Toronto. I mean, it makes sense, right? This is the beginning of a brand new coaching era for them, and I really do believe that they're going to struggle since London likely come out of the gates with confidence. So I'm going with the underdog here. The Spitfire take the match 3-2. Some might say it's foolish to trust in London so much, but in my honest opinion, there's a great chance that the mid-season madness goes very well for them. It's not by much, but I do slightly trust in London's versatility a bit more. I think it's a bit tougher to see Toronto being able to seamlessly pivot to different things in their current state. So I'm just going to go with what I consider to be the slightly safer option. Next we have the Atlanta Reign versus the Boston Uprising, and I hold a similar opinion with Boston that I do with Toronto, although Boston are maybe a bit further along, but they still have some adjustments to do too, right? A brand new game plan is required without Striker, and Victoria has not been a full-time starter for all that long, which could have a profound effect on the team's overall performance. And that's not all. Boston generally preferred Punk on the Zarya during those later weeks, but again, she may not be as strong this go-around after the balance changes, and the last thing you want to do is be uncomfortable for a matchup with the Atlanta Reign, since usually, at least historically, they do pretty well against teams who maybe lose their way a little bit. Now, if the Atlanta Reign didn't end the kickoff clash on such a positive note, I'd say maybe there's a chance for Boston here, as the Reign have shown struggles of their own during meta changes, but their confidence grew a ton after the tournament, and confidence goes a long way. I mean, look at what it did for them last year. I'm I'm liking the Atlanta Reign in a pretty decisive sweep. A lot of their team members have familiarity with rush compositions because it was a fundamental part of last year's system. If they spent some of their time practicing it, which I assumed they did, I suspect they'll look a lot better than what was demonstrated in that London series. And with more reliable damage dealers also on their side, I find it hard to not give the Reign the nod. Finishing up Friday is a match that most of us probably don't care about. It's the Titans and the Gladiators. It's the worst team in the league versus arguably the best. I'm not sure what else there is to say. I guess it'll be cool to see how the Titans do under DP for the first time and the fact that he's playing his old team. That's about all I've got though. If you're the Titans, I'd say that this is more just about showing improvement and going through the motions than trying to win. You're trying to get used to a brand new system and pick your heads out of the dirt after what was one of the most rough stages we've ever seen. They're outclassed in this situation, though. The Glads most definitely sweep. I want to believe in the Titans to get an upset at some point down the line, but this is not the opponent to do it against. As we get into the weekend, we've got a pretty decent looking match between the Outlaws and the Justice. I consider these two rosters to be somewhat close with one another, so let's call it a key match. I'd love to know how the Outlaws react to this balance patch. I'd say that it could be even harder to run the Doom comp now that we could end up seeing Lysana. However, the Outlaws could end up being that counter/curveball team that ends up running the Doomfist anyway, since it is a pretty decent counter to Rein, and they could be hard to figure out because of this since they're like the only team doing something weird. It depends on what the Justice play though, I suppose. Speaking of what the Washington Justice play, I'm a little unsure of how they do outside of these traditional dive compositions. In Houston, I've shown that they can find moderate success on other things like Rein and Sigma compositions. Listen, all I'm saying is, the more BAP and or double flex support the Outlaws get to play, the better it's going to work out for them. Their BAP Zen would easily overwhelm the Justice. Think about it like this too. Houston's other opponent this week is Vancouver, so reasonably speaking, they have lots of room to prep for this specific matchup. I don't know, man. There seems to be a lot of reasons to like Houston, so I'm picking them in a 4-map series. They have generally shown better consistency, with decent peaks, and unless Krillin and the DPS have an out-of-body experience for Washington, then I believe that the Outlaws should end up being victorious. Next, we've got Paris and LA. Man, it's crazy how easy this week is on paper for the LA Gladiators. They're literally playing two winless teams back to back. Can you really expect a struggling Paris team to make the Glad sweat? Probably not. The Eternal can barely use one comp effectively, let alone multiple, and the Gladiators have shown incredible flexibility this year. Their consistency is almost overwhelming. Reiner and the support line always show up, and even if the DPS change up, the Glads will be fine since their trio are almost always lethal no matter the circumstances. I'm sorry Paris fans, but this has got to be a 3-0 for the Glads. The Glads have so much star power to overwhelm and conquer here. We're talking more explosive talent, better teamwork, and superior coaching. The Eternal need to establish a rhythm before they're ready to challenge the Kings. Anyway, moving on, we've got the Dallas Fuel and the Atlanta Reign as they continue their rivalry in what will be my final important match of this week. I consider this game important, and it's not just because of the history. There's so much more to it. These two are some of the better teams we've got in the West, and I'm assuming that it should feel at least a little different compared to their tournament meetings, seeing as the composition choices could be slightly different. If Zarya becomes weaker and we see more of the rush, the Reign might have a serious opportunity. I'm also of the belief that Kai could be a really strong Sojourn player if she's meta, so the Reign could end up pushing the Dallas Fuel's buttons big time. The Fuel's momentum got stopped big time in the Kickoff Clash finals, and there's a possibility the Reign used that to their advantage. And considering that Dallas have two difficult opponents to prepare for this week, there's reason to believe that this is losable. I personally, though, do not think we're about to witness an upset, as I'm picking the Fuel to win 3-1. Dallas tends to live for these moments. They are really good at regrouping and not losing two straight. Dallas are one of the best bounce-back teams we have. That's how it was pretty much all of last year, and I don't see why that wouldn't change, seeing as they have basically the same team and the same coaching. If anything, it could probably end up being easier since they have an even deeper roster. This could be a good challenge for them, but I trust in them to get it done. On to the final day. Toronto versus Florida are up first. This one is intriguing because both of these guys are around the same level in theory. Each of them did some somewhat impressive stuff during the kickoff clash, and could seriously be scary on any given day. It also helps that a lot of the individual skill matchups are somewhat split, each getting certain advantages. You likely prefer the playmaking of Toronto's backline, but Florida's DPS line might be a bit more intriguing now that they have a rotation since Exy is there. Either team could end up taking this. In the end though, I prefer the Mayhem in a 4-map series. I don't know if Toronto are ready. My reasoning remains the same as the Defiant in London series. This Defiant team has some questions about their general functionality in more ways than one. I don't have those same questions with Florida, at least not to the same extent. They have a good sample size on a variety of comps with decent success. On paper, they're more prepared for drastic changes, and considering they have a more stable environment, at least on the surface, I feel comfortable saying Florida end up winning the series. What likely won't be as good of a match this week, though, is Boston versus the Shock. Regardless of what happens earlier in this week, Boston are likely dealing with a rough battle. We're talking an angry, motivated Shock. I told you guys in previous videos that their tournament shortcomings likely make them stronger, and I hold firm with this belief still. I am fully expecting the Shock to look even more disciplined, and most people would already prefer them to begin with, so I think you know where I'm going with this. This should be a sweep in favor of San Francisco. Better flexibility, better teamwork, and more playmakers. I'll leave it at that. Game number 3 on Sunday features the NYXL and the Paris Eternal. This could end up being a fun one. It's two struggling teams facing off, desperately trying to get their seasons back on track. Desperate times definitely call for desperate measures, folks. If we simply compare how both teams performed during the previous stage, they're pretty similar. It's two uninspiring teams for different reasons, right? Paris are maybe a bit unsure of themselves in more ways than one considering their future, while New York's synergy and comfort is way off. Who should we trust to fix themselves first? In general, I think most people would maybe say New York are a bit more trustworthy thanks to their talent, as there's always a reason to feel hopeful when Yaki and Flora are there to carry you. However, I kind of feel like the Eternal are a more decisive group when they play thanks to Dridro's superior main support abilities, and the idea of Khan getting his hands on the Baptiste makes me feel extra good about their chances. Paris looked so good last year when he got to bust out his ultimate comfort pick. If they play around him properly, I believe that the Eternal will have a serious advantage compared to the enemy backline. Comps involving Bap, Lucio, or Bap Brig will greatly favor the Eternal. New York might have the superior DPS and higher potential tank player, but it really doesn't matter that much if you aren't comfortable. I heavily value flexibility, especially when it could be the beginning of a new meta, and Paris have the edge in that department. Although I had New York slightly higher in my power rankings coming into this week, I'm going to be taking Paris in a 5-map affair. They've been winless for long enough. It's time for them to shine. I'm going to hope at least that the last few weeks helped a lot with incorporating Wub into the lineup better. I mean, I'd be surprised if Paris do not do a better job of playing around him, and if they have their way with rush compositions or at least stuff involving Bap, this should play more up to what they're used to. That sense of familiarity could give them the confidence they need to finally overcome the odds. And lastly, to finish off your week, we've got the Battle of the Green Teams. Now, maybe this will be a little less one-sided compared to Vancouver's other game this week, but that could be putting it in a very generous way, as Houston, while they're no LA Gladiators, are still in that upper top 5 or 6 in North America. I am pumped to see if DPay can help make Vancouver a better team, but that's going to take time. You can't expect this team to be gunning for upsets so soon. There's so much to figure out. Houston likely sweep without much of an issue. The teamwork is not going to get fixed overnight, and there's still a chance the meta is not favorable for the Titans, so I say GG go next, easy win for Outlaws. And there you go, folks, that's another prediction video and weekly preview in the books. This should be an interesting week as we feel out how much of a difference the patch makes. Let me know how you're feeling down in the comments below and what you're looking forward to. I'd love to hear your inputs. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.